folks. How we doing today? Happy Wednesday. Jumping on with you. We have an amazing guest, a love expert, therapist, author, podcast host of Reimagining Love. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. A little sad about the Tom Brady news. Hi, Sarah Sanderson. How are you, my love? But I am really excited about Tom Brady's future. We're going to see him in the booth. All kinds of fun things I think are going to come from him. His heartfelt retirement I posted on my Instagram. But that is not what we're talking about today. Folks, we are talking to someone really interesting, super fascinating. Let's get her on right away. Her name is Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Life, love, relationships, you know, stuff I find fascinating. And usually has a lot to do with our own relationship to ourselves. Hi, Dr. Alexandra. Thank you so much for jumping on. Sorry about being a little bit late. How are you today?
That's okay, but you just have to promise me you're not going to ask me a single question about Tom Brady because I got nothing. I got nothing for you.
Okay. You know, the only thing I think that we could talk about with regards to Tom Brady that you would know about is his relationship to work. And I don't know if you're familiar with his personal life, and really this isn't about his personal life, but he was married, and then this season they ended up getting a divorce and so on and so forth. But I imagine, this is really funny that we'll talk about it, because I do talk about it a lot in my own podcast with No Tom Brady Talk. I do talk about it in my own podcast. The thing I actually do relate to with Tom is my work addiction. You know, is the dopamine I get from my own job, actually. So is that something that as a, you know, a love expert, a therapist, an author, is that something that you kind of talk a little bit about? And why do we have that problem?
I know. You know, yeah. That is a lovely, like you made a really elegant bridge between football and something that is I live with my husband he's a like third generation Bears season ticket holder. So he is there, you know, front row, every single Bears game. He's raised our son to be the same way. So I am adjacent to football at all times, but it's like Charlie Brown's teacher when they're talking about it. Like I don't track. So I didn't even know there was a Tom Brady thing. But yes, I did. You know, interestingly, about a month ago, I published an episode of my podcast, Reimagining Love, and it was called, Is Work Stress Affecting Your Intimate Relationship? And that podcast got so much traction because I think that there is, you know, first of all, there's no such thing as work-life balance. We just have to banish the word balance from our, you know, vocabulary. But that is really true that there's something that we get. I really resonate with what you're saying about like the dopamine hit from work. It's an arena in which we can feel a tremendous amount of control, tremendous amount of self-expression, and there can be a tension with how do we give to work and how do we give to our intimate partnership. So I hear that. Yes, I think it's a significant, complicated, and unsolvable issue. It's not unsolvable. It's not solvable. You know, I think we can manage it. We can do a lot of like kind of self-reflection about why, like, what is it about work that I'm drawn to? Why is it hard for me to shut the computer down, step away, give my full attention to my partner? We can do some self-reflection work there and make tweaks, but it's not really a problem to be solved.
It's so interesting because, you know, I'm always on a path of self-exploration, doing the healing, looking inward. It's not always easy to kind of like call your own bullshit out. And I don't know what it is with my relationship to work, but I do feel, especially in the sports broadcasting world, we're all kind of on the same hamster wheel of like trying to get the Lombardi Trophy each and every year. The Lombardi Trophy is what you win at the end of the year if you are a champion in the game of professional football. Is it a masculine thing? Because I am exploring a lot of masculine, feminine traits, and I feel like for high performing women these days, are we sort of out of right balance if we're constantly trying to like achieve and succeed? And if that's the case, how do we find like homeostasis in that?
I know, right. Well, okay, so you're not going to catch me talking about like masculine versus feminine, because I end up talking myself into a corner very often. But for you, I imagine, and you are in, objectively, I imagine, a male dominated. I imagine you are frequently one of the only or very few women in rooms that you are in. You are literally in a more male dominated field, right?
Right.
So that makes sense. But I imagine that the part of you that your work taps into is like is that competitive part of you, that agentic part, like the part that like loves to have agency on the world around you. And that, I wouldn't call that masculine. Like, I think that we all have a deep desire to perform, excel, achieve, compete. And we all have a deep drive to connect, to have like agency and communion is the way that psychologists kind of break it up. Agency and communion. So we all have we have communal needs, the need to belong, the need to connect, the need to provide care, receive care. So we've done a weird thing in our world where we said that agency is for men, communion is for women, but that's not true. They're both human needs. So I imagine that in the work that you do, you maybe do have to be a bit more intentional about how are you tending to your communal needs, like the need to just connect rather than create a hierarchy, figure out what the next edge is. I imagine you do have to kind of like be more intentional about that.
I also had to learn that it's not just about me getting to the finish line, which was, I kind of grew up a little bit as an only child. I had two older brothers, but they were way older than me.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of had tunnel vision as an athlete growing up that like I needed to be the best. In order to receive love, acceptance, all of those things that we need in life. And then it wasn't until I started to really understand that, like, no, the power is actually bringing everybody up with you, right? I mean, that's like the most seductive, attractive quality you can do, is like to truly, genuinely get back to your community. I mentor other young women, an industry too for women that has felt very competitive, like don't give out your tips or secrets.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree with you. And not only that, my interview style changed where I didn't need to be so masculine with the way I interviewed men. I wanted to actually, like, my strength is actually getting their emotion rather than their execution, which is what I care about more anyways, is sort of like, how did you handle when the pressure was on the line, instead of like, how did you execute? So I noticed more of my femininity showing up in my job, and that actually has created more fulfillment where I'm not needing to be so like strong, competitive, and it's all about me. So it's interesting how we navigate that like throughout our own respective careers, and sort of like, I know you don't want to talk about masculine, feminine, but tapping into my own intuitive need to be more feminine in my job has actually created a more relaxed, creative version of myself in a way.
And what I think I'm also hearing you say is that you are shifting from being outcome focused, like literally asking about the outcome in your questions, and you're shifting to being more process focused. And I think that's so cool, because the thing that we know to be true is that external validation, like, it feels so freaking good when you get the likes and when you get the whatever accolade from the outside. That feels so good, but it's so not sustainable, right? It's not sustainable. So it's all about, for me, I know this in my own work, I have to go back to enjoying the process, the team I'm working with, the research I'm doing, the ideas I'm playing with, rather than how's it going to be received, world? Like, are you going to affirm me? Are you going to validate me? Is this going to get me to the next level, whatever the fuck that is, hell that is? So that's, I think, also the shift. It sounds like the shift you're making also is like just being in a process and like being present to that.
And that's such a amazing thing to say, doctor, because you just said, I'm going to repeat it for people tuning in, shifting from outcome focus to process focus is really interesting and powerful, because it's actually such a sports related concept too, right? Like a lot of sports psychologists say, if you're so worried about winning the World Series and you're not worried about fielding the ball and throwing it to first base, you're really not in a place of presence. And so when we're already at the finish line and we're really not working on the skill sets to get us to the finish line, we haven't figured out how to win a game at that point, you know? So that's really interesting that you've just connected the dots in terms of sports.
And you're being, you know, in this shift you're talking about in your interview style, like going from like, rather than asking your athlete, like, how do you feel about the execution, to asking your athlete, how do you handle, like, what did that moment feel like to you? Like, there's a really sneaky way that you're like subverting the entire culture when you do that, right? Because you're like reminding yourself, the athlete, the listener, like, let's just focus on the journey, because that's really all any of us has. So yay you.
Oh my God, you are full of all kinds of like amazing bits of knowledge. I love it. Okay, one of the things I do want to get to, because I know my time with you is limited, you're super busy. This is Dr. Alexandra Solomon, love expert, therapist, author, and your podcast is amazing, called Reimagining Love. You must check it out. But one of the things that you talk about that I wanted to ask was on your Instagram, also a solid follow. Please follow her on IG if you haven't yet. Helping someone versus rescuing someone. Are you referring to that to romantic relationships or relationships in general? And can you just also, what does that mean when you say help versus rescue?
Right. Okay, so yeah, and this is certainly a theme that comes up a lot, because in intimate partnership especially, we do become interdependent. You know, I think that's like, if there's a spectrum of you know, total dependence, I don't do anything without you, I don't know how I feel about something until I know how you're feeling about it, as one extreme. We know that's not healthy. But then the other extreme is that we just stay on parallel tracks, and I do me and you do you, and you know, we don't mix money, we don't mix time, you go your way, I go my way, you know, I'm not checking in on you. Like, that's a really lonely kind of hyper independent existence as well. So we want in our intimate partnerships especially to have interdependence. We know that the quality of connection between us is what's going to create a happy, healthy, thriving, sustainable relationship. And so that means if you're having a hard time, I want to be there for you and with you, because I care about you, and because in building a relationship, you have become somewhat reliant on me as one of your sources of support, right? But there's this very fine line between me being present to you, bearing witness to you, and me trying to make it go away and trying to save you from it. And that's where we start to get into trouble, is like, because ultimately what it conveys, if I'm attempting to make your problem go away, solve your problem for you, ultimately what I'm conveying to you is, I don't really believe you can handle it yourself. And I'm setting myself up for resentment, exhaustion, burnout, martyrdom, you know. So that's where I want people to kind of like really trust the power of just being present, just listening to you talk it through, asking, sometimes if we aren't clear where that line is, like asking, what would be helpful right now? Would you like advice? Would you like empathy? You know, would you like distraction? Like, I got a whole menu of things I can offer you, but what would support you right now? What would support feel like?
I love that. Yeah. I mean, and I agree, because a lot of relationships can get into that, right? There's the partner that likes to rescue, and then there's the partner that's like constantly needing they tend to find each other usually. Yeah. You know, if you look at attachment styles, as someone who's pretty aware of my attachment style, and I'm vocal about it, I tend to have dismissive avoidant. Okay. And sometimes you can't have two avoidants. They don't work. Nope. Right? can't get off the ground. Yeah, exactly. So I don't find an avoidant. I usually find an anxious or ideally a secure. Right. But I'm aware of my woundings, and I'm aware of sort of where that shows up, and how I'm trying to compassionately love myself through those things that I sometimes want to shame about myself. For sure. Right. Yeah.
So for you to let yourself receive help and support and care is probably a growing edge for you, like to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I've said this before. I had lost my father, and my family's house is a drive. You know, it's in the suburbs, my mom's house, and I was staying with her. And I remember a lot of wonderful girlfriends reaching out saying, like, can I spend time with, you know, can I see you? Can I spend time with you and your mom? Whatever. I remember in that moment going, ooh, like, even in my most despair, depressed, lonely sadness, I thought about the drive for them. I thought about how long the drive would be and going, like, it's a far drive. So where does somebody who does struggle with that, where do they start? Do they just sort of go like, because I think for me, and I think for a lot of people, and maybe a lot of women, but we certainly feel responsible for other people's feelings and actions. Yeah. Where do you begin to like heal that or release that? Or, you know, where do you start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you, first of all, I'm sorry about your loss. That is so difficult. And I would love, like, if I, you know, I would love for somebody to have whispered in your ear in that moment, like, if your friends are offering, like, you don't have to take care of your friends, right? They offered this to you. Like, that's, you know, and your, right, your block or your challenge was you went into like, they'll have to drive, they're putting themselves out. And probably also like, I can do it. Like you could get through that without the support of your friends. Like, you know how to do that. You know how to pick yourself back up, how to kind of just one foot in front of the other. You could. But what I love are relationships where we can really trust that if I'm offering something to you, I'm offering it from a place of open-heartedness. There's not going to be a price to pay. It's not going to be held over your head. It's not, you know, if I'm offering it, I have already done my first step, which is checking in with myself. Can I offer this with an open heart? You know, like, those are the kinds of relationships I want us to be cultivating, because then when the ask is made, it makes it so much easier to just receive, because there's nothing twisty going on. You know, you can trust that I've checked in with myself. I can trust that your, you know, that your yes is a yes, and that you know that I'm not going to hold this over your head. So I think that's, you know, it's part of it for sure is our own inner work. And part of it is learning how to cultivate relationships where there's that trust that we mean what we say and we say what we mean, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a thing that I have on my phone that reminds me every day at noon, what uncomfortable thing did you do today? And a lot of times the uncomfortable thing that I do is not like, oh, I bungee jumped or did a dangerous thing. It's usually this type of thing, which is like sort of stepping into asking for my needs to get met, or you know, the avoidant in me not being so avoidant. So that's been helpful as like a daily reminder to just sort of step into a little bit.
I love that, because otherwise, like, I feel like I spend so much of my time as a therapist, like, slowing people down and being like, wait a minute, hold on. Let's imagine how that would have played out 6 months ago. You know, like, let's like try. I spend so much of my attention in a therapy session is noticing what's the thing that went differently. How did the sequence play out differently? Even if it's only 1/2 of 1 degree different, I really want to catch that and shine a bright spotlight on it, because that's change. So I love that you have built into your phone something that where every day you're checking in, like, okay, so what did I do today that is different than I would have done it before, where I felt discomfort and I persisted, I tried something a different way. I think it's so huge. I think that we are so at risk of selling ourselves short and not noticing our own growth and evolution, because we can't see it. The only way we see it is by kind of looking at the past and comparing, how would I have met this moment 6 months ago, a year ago, a week ago, you know?
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, what uncomfortable thing did you do today? I think it really is stepping into just accepting. I was given really good advice from a buddy of mine who said, remember, when you're trying something new, you will always be a fool before you're a master. So when you just kind of accept that, like, picking up a guitar and thinking you're going to be Led Zeppelin is pretty naive, you know, that goes with any new skill set or new change or new habit. Just sort of embracing that maybe you might be awkward at first.
You know, who I want, the group of people I want to most remember that are people who are dating. Because I think people who are dating, because in the process of dating, you may be having a series of first dates, or you're kind of playing in a new relationship, but it's not taking off. Therefore, that person who just met you has no context. They're not going to be like, holy shit, look at you doing it differently than you used to, because they didn't know you back then. So I think that, like, that group of people, I think especially, like, if you are somebody who's dating and you're noticing that you're managing your boundaries a bit differently, you're asking for what you need a bit differently, you know, I want you to be especially paying attention to your own changes, and maybe having an ally, you know, a therapist or a friend who can also, like, be there to, like, you know, cheer for you, because that's I think in a longer term relationship, it's easy for somebody, you know, somebody like my husband has, like, the long-term view of me. He knows how I've evolved over time. You know, it's somebody who's dating maybe doesn't have, they're just kind of doing little snapshots. So
yeah, that's great advice. And I think also I'm a big proponent of journaling. Because of subconsciously, when you're just writing, like, you know, you're like, I mean, even us just doing the talking thing, you know, outcome versus process. Another thing I love is the voice notes. Is I send voice notes and then I listen to them back when I'm sending them to my friends, and I'm like, wow, I sound like I'm always sort of impressed with myself, surprisingly, where I'm like, God, I made sense with that, even though I didn't think that I was going to, or it, you know. And I think when you can sort of, exactly like you said, take stock in your daily win, you know, using, like, a great thing I do sometimes is this gratitude journal, where it's like, what went well today for you? Because we don't slow down, we don't stop, and we don't take stock in, like, what was different about me today than what I probably normally pattern-wise would have done. And I think that that's really great advice, doctor, because we don't take them, we were always a little bit on autopilot, and we don't take time to sort of, like, notice the shifts.
yeah.
Another question that I wanted to get to, because I know we're really short on time: brutal honesty and emotional safety. You posted this on your Instagram, and it's fascinating. Why can they not coexist in a relationship?
Yeah. So this is another one where I put this in this, you know, Instagram is so, it's just such a, well, I have complicated feelings about social media in general, but it's like a laboratory for me. Like, I create a post, I put it out there, and then the comments that come up or the questions come up, you know, I know how some things landed, what's off about it, how we need to go deeper. So it's quite a fascinating, like, back and forth. So that was a post that I had put up. Brutal honesty and emotional safety cannot coexist in a relationship. And it touched something in many, many people. And there were so many thoughtful questions. I went on to create 2, like, hour-long podcast episodes, like, peeling back more layers, standing in different, you know, places. I think that where I ended up is, I think that all of us we all exist somewhere along, like, a filter spectrum. You know, some of us are very, 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 like, the weave in our filter is really tight. Like, there's lots inside our heads, and we are super discerning about what comes out of our mouths. You know, if we say something, if we give feedback, it is well thought out. We've kind of gone over it. We've, like, played it through. How are you going to receive it? You know, we're tight with it. Others of us are at the other end of the spectrum, where the weave in our filter is rather loose. And if something's inside of our heads, it comes out of our mouths. Like, these are the people who are more blunt, you know, who are more, like, they say what they think. They're like, if we're going to be in a relationship, you're going to hear what's on my mind. And it's not, you know, there certainly are ways in which there are risks and benefits at both ends of the spectrum, and lots of us are in the middle. But basically, it was this idea that I see all too often in my clinical work and, you know, with students of mine, where they're sort of like, I'm just being honest. And I'm just being honest ends up being an excuse for saying something in a way that is critical rather than relational. Like, feedback is relational, but feedback says, you know, when you said X in situation Y, I felt Z. That's a relational framing, right? It's like, listen, you said this thing, it hurt my feelings, I want to check in about it. That's relational. Versus brutal honesty, you know, is critical. It's like, you're not, you know, it's more finger pointy. And so if we are if brutal honesty, I think, can be used as an excuse. I'm just being honest. Where I think we benefit from having some amount of refinement, not refinement to the point of inauthenticity, but refinement around how you feel about my words matters. I want to be able to be truthful while honoring the fact that you are a thinking, feeling being, you know.
That's so powerful, because you helped reframe that. I would think brutal honesty is like the best medicine for someone, and to be in a relationship with someone who's just brutally honest with you is a gift. But I agree with you.
Yep. Yep.
Brutal. Would you say that's nonviolent communication, wording it that way?
Yes.
The relationship, relational way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. I think that, and I think probably different, there's a cultural element here as well. I do think in the US, there is this emphasis on just straight talk and saying it like it is. And I sort of see it like there's a way in which we kind of elevate that quality. And certainly honesty and forthrightness, I understand how those are values, and we also need refinement, sensitivity, and honoring like the impact of our words. Yeah, relationships are not a free-for-all. Bottom line, relationships are not a free-for-all.
Yeah. We had Jillian Turecki on last week, who is an incredible author, and I love how she writes. And she said, relationships are a gift, not a given. And being able to show up, like we sometimes treat our most intimate relationships the worst, obviously.
That's right.
And being able to have like tact or refinement, like you say, is so effective in being able to communicate your needs, because you also don't realize someone could be just really triggered, and their form of brutal honesty is just their little child, being wounded and taking your head off, and that's not always enjoyable either way.
That's right.
Really quickly, before I let you go, obviously you do so much for everybody else. You're showing up for everybody else. You try probably not to absorb all of our woundings that that you navigate and handle. What do you do? Like, what are your non-negotiables when you wake up, during the day, like that fills your cup? And then how do you stay on the path of like awareness? What are the things that are you like constantly reading, listening to podcasts, having these types of conversations? So like self-care, that feels like self-care for me. What do you do for self-care?
Yeah. Okay. Well, like you, I am definitely at risk of kind of bleeding my boundaries, because I like my work and I have a lot of work to do. So, but I'm very committed to exercise. So I really am committed to building it into my week, before my week even begins, like knowing where exercise is going to go, because I am a better person, I'm a better therapist, I'm a better wife, I'm a better mother, all of the things when I am regularly attending. That's my easiest route to self-care, prioritizing myself, resetting my nervous system, all of that. So that's a really huge one. I try to be really diligent about sleep. That's a non-negotiable. Time with my husband. Well, our son is away at school, but time with our daughter and my husband. I really try to like put work away at some point, so we've got some time to watch a show together or do something together in the evening. Time with friends. And then in terms of self-care, I read a lot, because one of the best things about having a podcast is I pretty much every day there's a new book in the mail. Someone is coming on my show, sends me their book. I get to kind of dive in. So I love that it's like I get to be a student because I'm connecting with such fantastic authors. I have a women's circle. I've been part of a women's circle for almost 10 years, and we gather and we work our booties off, and we challenge each other and we support each other. So that is a huge part of my own like self-work, is having a community of women that is a intentional therapeutic community of women.
I love that. I just joined a women's group Can I ask you some questions about it? How often do you meet? For how long? And what are topics you guys discuss?
Yeah. So we emerged out of an organization called Women Within International, which was, I think it's like from like back in the 70s. It's a really cool, long-standing international organization. So this group of us from this area, Chicago suburbs, went to a weekend retreat, and then we formed what's called an e-circle, an empowerment circle. And it is highly scripted. Like we have a check-in procedure, we have a procedure for clearings, we state the kind of work we want to do that day, the ranking of the work. Like it's not, because you know what happens when women get together. Like, it's like you can start like shooting the shit, and it's supportive, but it's chit chatty. This is work. We're not drinking wine. We're, like we're sipping tea. Like it is highly ritualized, and I love it. And we get together. There's like every other week for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it.
It's so funny that you said that, because we did our first one and we thought it was a good idea to bring wine and cheese, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And then there was no structure, which is very feminine, right?
Yep.
Women, we're chaos.
Meandering around.
Right. We're like, and then after that, it was like, oh, let's just do it next week. And then we lost some sense of consistency and some routine. So that's why I had asked you, because I think you're right. Like it's a commitment, but when you can commit to it and create structure around it, it becomes super empowering and such a beautiful investment. So I love that you're doing that. How many women are in the group? Is it like a big group? Is it virtual?
Well, sometimes through the pandemic we were virtual. And actually last week we met virtually because we were kind of a smaller group. There are 8 of us. When we're all there.
To be in a group with you has to be so rewarding. Thank you for this time. You were super generous. I apologize. We started a little bit later. But thank you so much for your insight. You really helped me even reframe personal things that I love chatting about, especially as a broadcaster. My biggest thing is always to figure out how can I best connect with someone else and how can they connect with me. So you helped me even in the professional space as a reporter and a broadcaster. And I absolutely love your Instagram. I love what you're doing. You have a phenomenal podcast called Reimagining Love. And you'll send me the podcast of the one that you said got the most recent
the work one.
listens, because I think my followers, that's something I talk about a lot when it comes to work, addiction, and relationship, and I think they'll get it. They'll enjoy it. So thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to continuing to follow you and listening to more of your podcast.
Absolutely,
you're the best.
It was so good to meet you, Erin. I was so happy to be here with you.
Yay. All right, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye, doctor.
Okay,
see you
bye-bye.
guys.